Her stepbrother sold her with a cracked spoon and a rusty nail to a cattle drover. The spoon was in my coat pocket for 11 days before I understood what it meant. I'd picked it up off the ground the morning after the deal, if you can call it that, because it was just lying there in the mud beside the wagon wheel, cracked clean down the middle, the kind of crack that happens when somebody throws something hard against something harder. A woman's spoon. Bone handle, the kind you could buy at any dry goods store for a nickel, except this one had a small notch filed into the handle, deliberate. The kind of mark a person puts on their own things when they share a camp with strangers and want to know what's theirs. I picked it up because I'm not a man who leaves things in the dirt if they can be carried. Didn't know whose it was, didn't think about it much, put it in my pocket and kept moving. My name is Calhoun Briggs. I drove cattle for 31 years, first for other men, the last 16 for myself. I ran a mid-sized operation out of the Breaks country east of the Pecos, enough head to make it worth doing, not so many I needed a partner. I had 4 drovers who came back season to season because I paid square and didn't work a horse to death, and I had a cook named Aurelio who had been with me so long he'd stopped asking what I wanted for supper and just made whatever he felt like. That was fine with me. I'm not a man who needs much. I was 54 years old that spring. I don't say that to set anything up. I say it because it matters to what I thought I was and what I thought I wasn't. At 54, after that many years moving cattle across country that would kill a man who wasn't paying attention, you get a particular idea of yourself. You know your edges. You know what you'll do and what you won't, and you know better than to expect the world to surprise you because it mostly doesn't. Mostly. We were 2 days out of Laredo on a northward push, following the old route up toward the rail junction at Hondo Crossing, when we came up on Deke Pallister's camp. I knew Deke. Not well, you don't know Deke Pallister well, because Deke Pallister doesn't let you, which is its own kind of information about a man. We'd crossed paths at stockyards, traded nods, done the kind of business that happens when 2 outfits share a water source for a night and then move on. He ran a small string of steers he was always supposedly about to sell but never did, and he had a reputation for finding things that belonged to other people and relocating them without all the paperwork. Nothing I could prove, nothing I'd tried to prove, not my business. His camp was set in a dry creek bed where a few cottonwoods gave shade. 1 wagon, a cook fire that hadn't been fed in a while, just coals. 2 horses picketed and a third one I didn't recognize, smaller, a dun mare with a blaze, trail-worn and hip-shot, the kind of tired that takes more than 1 night of rest to fix. Deke came out from behind the wagon when he heard us. He had the look he always had, which was the look of a man deciding what something was worth while you were still watching him think about it. I pulled up. My lead drover, a Cherokee man named Eli Forkeler, pulled up behind me. The others stayed with the herd. "Briggs," Deke said, like he'd been expecting me. "Deke, you're headed to Hondo Crossing." "I am." He nodded, slow. He had a way of nodding like he was agreeing with something you hadn't said yet. "I've got a proposition." I didn't say anything. With Deke, you let him run because any question you ask is something he can use. "I've got a woman," he said, "my stepsister. She's been traveling with me out of necessity. Our father died back in March, left the place to me, and there wasn't anywhere for her to go. She's been slowing me down and eating provisions, and I need to move faster than she can move." I looked at the wagon. The canvas was down, nothing moved. "What exactly are you proposing?" I said, and I kept my voice flat because I already didn't like the shape of what was coming. "You're a drover, you need a camp cook. Aurelio's good, but he can't do everything. She can cook, she can mend, she can keep a camp. I'll let you have her for—" He reached into his vest pocket and held up 2 things. A rusted nail, the square-headed kind, old, and a cracked bone-handled spoon. I looked at those 2 objects in his palm for what felt like a long time. "Those are her things," he said. "Her only things because I sold the rest. You give me $2 for the provisions she ate and she's yours for the drive. Yours to keep or yours to let go at Hondo Crossing, whatever you decide. She knows she's going." I heard Eli shift in his saddle behind me. That was the only sound. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. I'm not sure I can put it plain enough to do it right. There's a particular kind of disgust that isn't loud. It doesn't come out as anger, not right away. It comes out as a kind of cold that starts behind your eyes and moves down through your chest, slow and even. I'd seen men sell horses that were worth more than they were. I'd seen men sell things that weren't theirs to sell. but there's something different about watching a man hold up a cracked spoon and a rusty nail and tell you what his stepsister is worth. I said she knows she's going. I told her. I'd like to hear that from her. He looked at me a moment, then he turned and said toward the wagon, "Nora, come out." She came out from the back of the wagon. She was younger than I'd expected, middle 20s maybe, hard to say with certainty because the road had put years on her face that her eyes hadn't caught up to yet. Brown hair pulled back, a gray dress that had been washed so many times it had gone the color of creek water. She was carrying a canvas sack that appeared to hold almost nothing. She had a bruise along her left jaw, faded but still there, the yellow-green of a week old. She looked at me, not a deek, at me. Her eyes were steady. That was the thing. She'd been handed over like a piece of goods, and her eyes were the steadiest eyes in that dry creek bed. "He told me," she said, "you agreeable to riding with my outfit to Hondo Crossing." She looked at the wagon, back at me. "I'm agreeable to not staying here." That was all I needed to hear. I didn't give Deke $2, I gave him nothing. He started to say something about it, and I turned my horse and said, "You want to make this into something, Deke? We can make it into something." He didn't say anything else. Men like Deke only push when they think the odds are with them, and they've usually already calculated the odds better than you'd expect. Eli came alongside me as we moved back toward the herd. He didn't say anything for a while. That's Eli's way. Then he said, "That man is going to be trouble later." "Probably," I said. "What are you going to do with her?" I thought about that for a moment. Same as I said, get her to Hondo Crossing. Eli nodded once and dropped back. Her name was Nora Pallister, which was her father's name, not the stepbrother's. The stepbrother was Deke Marsh, though he'd taken to calling himself Pallister after the old man died, which tells you everything about why he'd done it. Her father had been a small rancher in the hill country, cattle and some goats, the kind of operation that runs thin in dry years and breaks even in good ones. He'd taken Deke's mother as a second wife when Nora was 7, which made Deke 10 years her senior and about as brotherly as a fence post. The old man had been decent, she said. He'd been decent and he'd died fast, a horse accident, and he'd left the deed to Deke because that's how it was done, and Deke had sold the stock and the equipment within a week and told her she could come along until he figured out what to do with her. She told me all of this that first evening while she was helping Aurelio clean the cook pots after supper. Not volunteering it exactly, I'd asked. I thought she deserved to be asked. She answered plain without looking for sympathy in it, which I respected more than I can say. Aurelio, for his part, took one look at her, took one look at me, and made a sound somewhere between a grunt and the beginning of a word that he never finished. Then he handed her a rag and showed her where the lye soap was kept, and that was that. Aurelio is not a man who requires a great deal of explanation before he makes up his mind about a person. I gave her the space on the supply wagon, which was the safest and most sheltered spot in the outfit. I told Eli and the other 3 drovers, a pair of brothers named Cassius and Webb Dunbar, and a young man from up near Uvalde called Trace, that she was traveling with us to Hondo Crossing, and that was all they needed to know about it. Eli nodded. The Dunbar brothers nodded. Trace looked like he had a question, but decided against asking it, which showed better judgment than I'd given him credit for. She was not a burden. I want to say that clearly and without qualification because I don't know what I'd expected. I'd expected someone who'd been used and beaten down to show it in how they moved, how they did things. She showed it some, yes. She was careful in a way that people are when they've learned to take up as little space as possible. She ate less than she ought to. She stayed near the wagon and didn't come closer to the fire than she needed to. But she worked, Lord, she worked. She was up before Aurelio in the morning, and Aurelio was up before anything that could be called dawn, and she had water on and wood sorted before he got there. She could cook, that was true, but more than that she could think about a camp the way a person thinks about a camp when they've lived rough for a while, which is to say she could see what needed doing before anyone said it. A loose wheel spoke. A cinch left to fray. Water skins that needed checking. She moved through the camp quiet and purposeful, and after the first 2 days the drovers stopped noticing her the wrong way and started noticing her the right way, which is to say they started taking their hats off when she brought coffee and saying thank you like they meant it. That mattered to me. I didn't examine why right away. The country we were crossing that stretch was hard country. Caliche flats broken by dry arroyos, cedar and scrub mesquite, the sun coming down flat and white by midday. We pushed 12 to 14 miles a day when we could, less when the ground turned rough or a steer went lame. I was out front most of the time and back with the drag some of the time, and the rest of the time I was doing what drovers do, which is watch and wait and fix things before they break. On the fourth day, she rode up alongside me. She had the dun mare, her own horse, which she handled well, better than I'd expected from a woman who'd been on the road under someone else's control. She came up at a walk and matched my pace and didn't say anything for a while, and neither did I, because I'd learned early that she wasn't a person who spoke without reason. "I want to say something," she said finally. "Go ahead. I know what you gave up for me, nothing, and I know what Deke would have done if you hadn't taken me, and it was probably worse than what he already did." She paused. "I'm not asking you for anything beyond Hondo Crossing. I just wanted you to know I know what this is and what it isn't, and I'm not going to make it complicated." I thought about that for a while before I answered. "It's not complicated," I said. "You needed a way out of a bad situation. I had a way to provide it. That's all it is." She looked at me then, not long, just a moment. Then she looked back at the country ahead. "All right," she said. We rode for a while. "That spoon," I said, I don't know why I said it then, it just came out. "Was it yours?" She looked over at me. "Yes." I reached into my coat pocket and held it out to her, the cracked one with the notch filed in the handle. She took it, looked at it. I could see something move through her face, not grief exactly, something older than grief and quieter. "He threw it," she said. "The night before he made the deal with you, I told him I wouldn't go without a fight, and she stopped, touched the crack with her thumb. Well, I went without a fight." She put the spoon in her dress pocket. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the spoon, I thought, for all of it. For picking it up out of the mud in the first place." I didn't say anything, didn't need to. On the sixth day, Deke Marsh rode into our camp. I'd been expecting it, or something like it, since the day we left. Eli had been right about that. Men like Deke have a particular kind of pride that has nothing to do with self-respect. It's the kind of pride that's really just about not being seen to lose, and he'd been seen to lose in that dry creek bed when I'd ridden away without paying him. He came in at evening, when the herd was bedded and the fire was going, and most of the outfit was in various stages of sitting down. He had 2 men with him I didn't know, range riders, the both of them, the kind you hire by the day for jobs you don't want to put your own name on. He pulled up at the edge of the firelight. His horse was better rested than the last time I'd seen him, which meant he'd moved fast to get ahead of us and loop around. That took some doing, which told me he'd wanted this enough to work for it. "Briggs," he said. I stood up from the log I'd been sitting on. "Slow, no hurry, Deke. You owe me $2 and the woman." I looked at him. I looked at the 2 men beside him, who were watching me with the particular attention of men who have been told what they're getting paid to do. "I don't owe you anything," I said, "and she's not yours to be owed. She's my stepsister, my property to dispose of as I see fit until she marries or makes other arrangements." "That's the law." "The law," I said, "doesn't make a woman a nail and a spoon's worth of property, Deke, and even if it did, you don't want to test that with me tonight." Eli had come up beside me, quiet as a cat, the way he always moved. The Dunbar brothers were on their feet. Trace had moved to the far side of the wagon, and I could hear the specific sound of a rifle being eased off its rest. Nora came out of the shadow beside the supply wagon. She walked to where she could be seen clearly, and she stood there, and she looked at Deke. "I'm not going with you," she said. Her voice was even. "I'm not going with you, and there isn't a law in this territory that can make me. Because I'm grown and my father's dead, and you've got no legal claim on me that I haven't already nullified by leaving voluntarily. You want to argue that? Argue it in Hondo Crossing in front of a judge." Deke looked at her. There was something ugly in his face, the kind of ugly that isn't about the moment, but about a long time of feeling like the world owed him more than it gave. "You think this man is going to keep you?" he said. "You think he gives a damn about you past that junction?" She didn't answer, she looked at me. I don't know what he expected her to do. Maybe flinch. She didn't flinch. I took 2 steps toward Deke's horse. "You came a long way to be told no twice," I said. "You want to make this into something more than what it is? We'll make it more. But understand that those 2 men you brought with you are going to have to decide if what you're paying them is worth what happens next. And I'd say there's about a 50-50 chance they decide it isn't." One of the 2 hired riders was already drifting back, just slightly. Not enough to be obvious about it. Enough. Deke looked at his men, looked at me, looked at Eli standing beside me like a wall that had decided to be a man. He pulled his horse around. "This isn't done," he said. "Yes, it is," I said. He rode out. His men rode after him, the one in the back with a little more hurry in him than the front one. I watched until the dark took them. I turned around. The whole outfit was standing there, and for a moment nobody said anything. Then Aurelio said from the fire, "The beans are going cold," and that was the end of that. Nora was still standing by the supply wagon. When I walked back past her, she said my name, just Briggs, which was all anyone called me, and when I looked at her, she had that steady look again, the one from the dry creek bed, except this time there was something else in it. Something warm and complicated that I told myself I wasn't going to think about. "Thank you," she said, for the second time. It was becoming a kind of habit between us. "Get some sleep," I said. "We're making early start." I don't know exactly when things changed. That's the truth of it. It wasn't one moment or not only one. It was the accumulation of days, which is how most real things happen. Not in a single instant, but in the weight of ordinary mornings and evenings, until the weight is more than you can ignore. It was the way she handed me coffee in the mornings, direct, not deferential. The way you hand something to a person you've decided to take seriously. It was the way she talked to Aurelio, asking him about his cooking, not flattering him about it, asking real questions about why he did things the way he did, and Aurelio answering with more words than I'd heard him use in a month, because she was asking the right questions. It was the way she sat with Eli one evening and listened to him talk about the country we were passing through, the Cherokee name for a particular kind of flat rock formation, and she asked him to say it again so she could hear it right. And Eli looked at me afterward with an expression that I couldn't quite read, but that seemed to carry some meaning. It was the evening she found me working on a cinch buckle that had started to wear through, sitting on the ground with my back against a wagon wheel at the end of a long day. And she sat down about 3 feet away and didn't say anything for a while, and then said, "You ever get tired of it?" "Of what?" "Driving cattle, moving, being the one responsible for all of it." I thought about that. "Sometimes," I said, "not often. It's what I know how to do." "What would you do if you stopped?" "I've got land east of the Pecos, decent land. I'd run a smaller operation, fewer people depending on me." "That sounds lonely," she said. "It probably is," I said. "I'm used to my own company." She looked at me then and she said, "No, you're not." I looked at her. "What?" "You're not used to your own company. You're good at it. That's different. A man who's used to being alone doesn't build an outfit that comes back season to season. A man who's good at being alone does." She paused. "I think there's a difference." I didn't have an answer for that. I went back to the buckle. After a while she said, "My father was like that, good at being alone, but he liked having the house full." She was quiet. "I used to think that was a contradiction. Now I think it's just," she stopped. "I think it's just what some people are." I looked over at her. She was watching the fire in the distance, where Aurelio was doing something to a Dutch oven. "Your father sounds like he was a decent man," I said. "He was," she said it simply, without self-pity. "He made one mistake, but he was decent." We didn't talk much more that evening. But she didn't move away, and I didn't ask her to, and we sat there until the fire burned low and it was time for the first night watch. That was the night I understood what the spoon meant, not just that I'd picked it up and carried it, but that I'd known when I handed it back to her that it mattered. That her things mattering was something I couldn't stop caring about, whether I'd meant to or not. We were 4 days from Hondo Crossing by my reckoning. I was not a man who had ever been good at saying things before they needed to be said, and I was not going to start then. But I started to be aware of the time running down, the way you're aware of the light changing in late afternoon, that particular quality of knowing something is going to end. She was aware of it too, I could tell. There was a different kind of attention in her when she looked at me or when she was working near me. Not what I'd have called longing, it wasn't that soft. It was more like the kind of attention a person pays when they're trying to fix something in their mind. The second incident with Deke happened on the 8th day, closer to Hondo Crossing than I'd expected. He hadn't come alone this time. He had 4 men, and 2 of them were armed up in a way that told me they'd been hired specifically for this, and not just picked up on short notice. They came out of a draw about a 1/4 mile from a creek crossing, spread wide. which was tactical, and told me at least one of them had done this kind of thing before. I pulled the herd up, looked at the spread of them, looked at my outfit, Eli, the Dunbar brothers, Trace, Aurelio with a shotgun across his knee on the wagon seat. Deke pulled up in the middle. "I want the woman," he said, "and I want the $2, and you can go about your business." "Still no," I said. "Then we'll have trouble." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about 31 years of driving cattle, which is 31 years of solving problems before they become bigger problems, and I thought about how some problems don't solve. Some problems you just have to walk through. "Deke," I said, "you've chased us 80 miles, you've hired men twice. You've spent more getting her back than she was worth to you to begin with. So the question isn't about the $2 or even about Nora. The question is about you not wanting to be seen to lose." He didn't say anything, which was confirmation. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it plain," I said. "I'm not going to let this be the place where she goes back with you. I'm going to be the last thing between her and you, and I'm going to stay that way, today and at Hondo Crossing and wherever she ends up. That's done. The question now is whether you ride away and that's the end of it, or whether you push this and there are men on both sides who get hurt, possibly killed, for a piece of stubbornness that isn't worth what it costs." Silence. The cattle shuffled, a horse stamped. One of Deke's hired men, the one farthest right, the one I'd identified as the most experienced, shifted slightly in his saddle. Not forward, sideways and back just an inch. Deke saw it, his jaw tightened. "You're making me look like a fool," he said. "You made yourself look like a fool," I said. "In a dry creek bed 9 days ago when you held up a cracked spoon and a rusty nail and called it a trade. I just watched." Something went out of his face then. Not anger, something else. Something that was maybe, underneath all the bluster and the hired guns and the riding 80 miles, just the remains of a man who'd lost more than he'd let himself admit and was trying to take it out on someone who couldn't fight back. It didn't make me feel sorry for him. It just made the whole thing sadder and smaller than it had seemed. He looked at Nora, who was on the wagon seat beside Aurelio, and something moved through his face that I couldn't read from that distance. Then he turned his horse. He rode north. His men, one by one, peeled off after him. The experienced one, the last to go, looked at me for a moment with something that might have been professional respect. Then he was gone. I let out a breath. Eli came up beside me. "You knew he'd go," he said. "I thought he probably would." "What if he hadn't?" I looked at Eli. "Then it would have gotten ugly." I turned back to the cattle. "Let's move." That evening she came and stood near me while I was working the hobbles on my horse, and when I straightened up she was right there and she put her hand on my arm. Not grabbing, not clinging. Just her hand on my forearm through the sleeve, steady. "I heard what you said to him," she said. "Sound carries. Today and at Hondo Crossing and wherever she ends up," she said. "You said that." I looked at her. The fire was behind her, and the sky was going dark above, and her face was plain in the last of the light, and I thought, not for the first time, that she was one of the most honest-looking people I'd ever seen. Not beautiful in the way of paintings, beautiful in the way of something true. "I said it," I said. "Did you mean it?" I held her gaze. I don't say things I don't mean. She held onto my arm for a moment more. Then she said, "I'm not a woman who needs protecting forever. I want you to know that. I just needed protecting from one particular thing at one particular time." "I know that. But she stopped, started again. "I'd like it if Hondo Crossing wasn't the end. I'm telling you that plainly because you seem like a man who does better with plain." I looked at her hand on my arm, the campfire smell, the low sound of the herd settling, Aurelio making some quiet noise with a pot somewhere behind us. "I do better with plain," I said. "And plain is, I'm 54 years old and I've got land east of the Picos and I'm better at cattle than I am at most human things. And if you're telling me you'd like more than Hondo Crossing, I'd like that too. I've been thinking about little else for 4 days." She made a sound that was something like a laugh but quieter, and she moved her hand off my arm and instead took my whole hand, the way you take a thing you've decided is yours. We stood there for a moment, and I thought about Deke holding up that cracked spoon in the dirty light of a dry creek bed, and I thought about how strange it is, the way the very worst things sometimes turn, slow and without announcement, into something you couldn't have planned if you'd tried. Hondo Crossing was a bigger settlement than I usually made a fuss about. A proper town, a rail junction, a stockyard with buyers waiting, a land office and a dry goods store, and a building that served as a courthouse 2 days a week. We came in on a Tuesday afternoon with the herd raising dust, and the drovers looking trail-worn and competent the way they looked at the end of every drive, which was to say tired and capable in equal measure. I sold the cattle to a buyer named Armand Cassel, who I'd dealt with 3 times before and trusted as far as you could trust a cattle buyer, which is a specific and limited distance, but reliable within those limits. We agreed a price inside of 20 minutes, which was a good sign, and the wire transfer would settle in 3 days at the Hondo Crossing Bank. That was the business end. The other end was Nora. I'd been thinking about it for 4 days, and I'd been trying to think about it without thinking about what I wanted, which is what I've always done when I try to think clearly. Set aside what I want first, see what the facts say. The facts said she was 26 years old and I was 54, and she had no money and no family and no particular prospects, and I had a working ranch with a comfortable enough house and 3 regular hands and no one to leave it to. The facts said we'd known each other for 11 days, which was not a long time by any measure. But I'd also been in this territory long enough to know that most of the solid things I'd ever seen built between people had been built on less than they probably should have been, and had held anyway. And the facts also said that she'd told me plain what she wanted, and she didn't seem like a woman who did things she didn't mean. I went to the land office on the 2nd day. Not for myself, I already had my deed. I went to the clerk there, a man named Pitts who wore sleeve garters and had the precise mannerisms of a man who enjoyed being the only person in the room who knew where something was filed. I need to know something about the legal standing of a woman whose stepbrother has been claiming authority over her, I said. The stepbrother is not her blood relation. She's 26 years old. Her father's dead. What's his legal claim? Pitts looked at me over his glasses. None, he said. Absolutely none. A grown woman with no living father or husband is her own legal person in this territory, has been since 73. That's what I thought. Is there a dispute? There was, I said. I told Nora at supper. She listened and nodded once. I knew that, she said. I told him that night by the wagon. You did. He knew it too, she said. He just didn't want it to be true. I nodded. Briggs, she said. She had a way of saying my name that sounded like the beginning of a decision. What are you thinking about? The land east of the Picos, I said. She looked at me. It's decent land, I said. The house is serviceable, it needs some attention. I've been meaning to fix the east wall of the kitchen for 2 years and I haven't done it. I stopped. I'm asking you something. I'm not doing it particularly well. No, she said, you're not. But the corner of her mouth was doing something. Would you come back with me, I said. Not as any kind of arrangement, as I stopped. I'm not a man who usually has trouble knowing what word to use. You want to marry me, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The evening was cooling off, the way evenings in that country do in spring, fast and welcome. You know I've got nothing, she said. No money, no family, nothing to bring to it. I know what you've got, I said. I've been watching it for 11 days. She looked at her hands on the table, then she looked up at me. The kitchen wall, she said. What about it? I'll fix it, she said. I know how to do mortar work, my father taught me. And that was it. That was the whole of it. We were married in Hondo Crossing on a Thursday morning, in the same building that served as a courthouse, in front of a circuit judge named Waverly who charged $3 for the service, and seemed genuinely pleased to have something to do that wasn't a land dispute. Eli stood as my witness. Aurelio brought bread he'd baked that morning. The Dunbar brothers and Trace stood in the back and looked uncomfortable in the way young men look when they're witnessing something that makes them feel a feeling they don't have a name for. Nora wore the gray dress. It was the only dress she had. She had the cracked spoon in her pocket. I knew because I'd seen her put it there that morning. I didn't say anything about it. Some things you don't need to say. When the judge said the words and she said yes, she turned and looked at me with those steady eyes, and I thought, there it is. That's the thing. Not the words or the ceremony or any of the outside of it. Just a woman looking at a man with eyes that said she knew exactly what she was doing and had chosen to do it anyway. I put my hand on her face, because it was the thing that came to me naturally, and she turned her face into my hand, and that was the warm hole of it. We rode east 4 days later. Eli rode with us as far as the river and then turned north toward his own country, which he'd been headed to all along. The drive had been a means, not the destination, the way it often was for him. We shook hands at the crossing. "Good woman," Eli said to me, which from Eli was a paragraph. "I know it," I said. He nodded at Nora, she nodded back. Then he crossed the river and the distance took him. The Pecos country in late spring is a particular kind of beautiful, which is to say it doesn't look beautiful if you expect beauty to be soft. It's hard and clear, and the light sits on it like something with weight. The grass was coming in where there'd been rain, and the flat-topped mesas to the west caught the afternoon light in a way that I'd looked at for 16 years and not gotten tired of. She saw it for the first time from horseback, the dun mare carrying her easy, and she didn't say anything for a while, just looked at it. "It's big," she said finally. "It is. You've been out here alone for 16 years. I had hands. That's not the same thing. No, I said, it's not. We came down a long slope toward the headquarters, which was 4 buildings and a good corral and a windmill that needed its gearing looked at. The house was stone and cedar, low and long, with a covered porch on the south side that I'd sat on 10,000 times and never given much thought to. She looked at it for a long moment. "The east wall of the kitchen," she said. "On the left side as you face it." She nodded, assessing. I could see her looking at it the way her father had probably taught her to look at a wall that needed work, not judging it, just reading it. That practical eye. "I'll need lime and sand," she said. "I'll get it from town. And you'll need to stay out of that corner for 2 days while it cures." "I've stayed out of it for 2 years," I said. 2 more days won't kill me." She looked at me then, and something in her face was open in a way I hadn't seen before, something past the steadiness and the careful watching. Something that was just gladness. Plain old gladness, like a door that had been pushed shut a long time and was finally allowed to open. She came alongside me close, and her shoulder was against my arm, and we stayed that way for a moment, looking at the place. "This is a good place," she said. "It is," I said, "better now." She didn't answer that. She just nudged the dun mare forward and rode down toward the house, and I watched her go. And I thought about cracked spoons and rusty nails and dry creek beds and the particular arithmetic of a life, how it adds up in ways you never predicted and wouldn't have dared to want. I followed her down. The east wall of the kitchen got fixed that first week. She was good at it, the way she was good at most things she put her hands to, careful and steady, the work done right the first time so it didn't need doing again. I watched her from the doorway one afternoon while she was setting the last section, her hands moving with the ease of old knowledge, and I thought about how I'd spent 16 years with a wall I'd stopped seeing because I'd stopped believing it would get fixed. It's a small thing. I know it's a small thing, but some of the real things are. The first winter was hard, the way winters east of the Pecos can be, cold that comes in fast and the wind off the flats with teeth in it. We lost 2 calves in a late freeze and 1 section of fence that I had to rebuild in January in weather that made me reconsider some of my life choices. She kept the house. She kept the accounts. She rode with me when I needed another pair of eyes on the range. She was good with the horses, better than I'd expected, though I'd stopped being surprised by what she was good at. The dun mare thrived in my pastures, the way a horse does when it's finally getting fed right and worked sensible. She wrote to no one. There was no one to write to. That was the whole of her family gone, the father she'd loved and the stepbrother she'd been used by, and those were the choices life had given her. I thought about that sometimes, in the way you think about things you can't fix. She didn't seem to think about it the same way. She seemed to have made her accounting and closed the ledger on it, which was either a particular kind of strength or a particular kind of damage, and I wasn't sure which, and maybe it was both. In the spring, she planted a kitchen garden on the south side of the house, in the strip of ground between the porch and the old fence line. Not a fancy garden, beans, squash, some tomatoes that she wasn't sure would take in that soil. She worked at evenings after supper in the long light. I watched her from the porch sometimes. She'd look up and see me watching, and she'd say something like, "That tomato plant is struggling," or, "I think the beans will come." And I'd say something back, and we'd talk across the yard, easy and unhurried, the way you talk to someone you've stopped having to perform for. That summer, Eli came through again, heading south on another drive, and he stopped for a night. He and I sat on the porch after dark and drank whiskey and talked about cattle and weather and roots, the usual things, and Nora sat with us for a while and then went in when she got tired. And before she went in, she put her hand on my shoulder for a moment, not making a thing of it, just doing it. And Eli watched her go inside and then looked at me. He said, "You look different." "Older." No, he thought about it. Settled. I thought about that word, settled. I'd always taken it to mean slowed down, worn out, sanded to a flat by time. But sitting there in the dark with the sound of the night and the light in the kitchen window, I thought maybe it meant something else. Maybe it meant a man who had finally come to rest in a place that was the right shape for him. "Yeah," I said. Eli nodded. We drank our whiskey. Deke Marsh I never saw again. I heard 2 years later a rumor through a stockman I knew out of Laredo that Deke had gotten sideways with a land claim up in the Panhandle and had lost what little he'd put together. Whether it was true, I don't know. It didn't matter much. Some men are like bad weather, you endure them, and then they pass and the country goes back to looking like itself. The cracked spoon, I should tell you about the cracked spoon. She kept it, I knew she kept it. I'd seen it in the kitchen the first winter, sitting in the crock with the other wooden spoons and the ladle, and I'd thought maybe she'd thrown it in without thinking, the way you throw things into a crock. But one morning that second spring I was looking for something in the drawer under the kitchen window, the catch-all drawer where things ended up that didn't have a place, and I found it there, wrapped in a piece of cloth. Deliberate, kept deliberate. I didn't ask about it, I put it back and closed the drawer. Later that day, she was out working the garden and I was watching her and I said, "I found the spoon." She looked up. "I know you did, I heard the drawer." "You kept it wrapped up?" "Yes." "Why?" She sat back on her heels and looked at me, and the sun was behind her and she had dirt on her hands and the garden was coming up around her, and she said, "Because it's where I started from, where this started from." She looked at the spoon in her pocket. She'd taken to keeping it there sometimes when she worked. "I don't want to forget what it cost to get here, either of us." I thought about that for a moment, about a cracked spoon and a rusty nail in a man's dirty palm in a dry creek bed. About picking something up off the ground, because you don't leave things in the dirt if they can be carried. "That's fair," I said. She went back to her planting. I went back to watching her, this woman who had come to me with nothing and brought everything, who had looked at a broken-down rancher with a kitchen wall. He'd stopped fixing and seen something worth choosing, who had stood in front of her stepbrother with steady eyes, and said no in the only voice that matters, which is the voice that means it. I was 56 by then. The Pecos country was putting on green in the May light the way it does when the rains come right. The horses were good. The cattle were good. The east wall of the kitchen was solid. My hands came back every season and would keep coming back, because a man who runs a square operation earns that. And there was this woman in my garden, with her father's cracked spoon in her pocket and her hands in my soil. And she looked up at me once more from her planting and said nothing, just looked. The way she'd looked at me in the beginning, steady, clear, not performing anything. She chose this, that's what I come back to. She chose this with nothing pushing her to it and nothing pulling her away from it. She looked at all of it, the hard country, the small house, the man who was better at cattle than most human things, and she chose. I don't know what a man's supposed to do with that. I only know what I did, which was tend it. Every day, tend it like ground that had come good after years of drought. That's enough, that's the whole of it. That's everything.